There are few children's book series that can be described as cult classic. A phrase here which means a dedicated yet sometimes small amount of people, say about the size of your local volunteer fire department, who appreciate an often underappreciated work, which may include terrible stories with terrible villains in terrible places. Now, this just so happens to be exactly what a series of unfortunate events is, and there are few series that focus so heavily on misery and tragedy, and it's hard to imagine this getting greenlit today. But despite the misery and tragedy being painted in this surreal, comedic, and abstract way, the core themes here hit hard: grief, death, and kind of the banality of evil. And this is way heavy stuff for the target audience of 9 to 12-year-olds. This series was unlike anything that had come before or since, and by all accounts, it should have failed. I mean, why would anyone want to read a book about orphans dealing with tragedy after tragedy? But in this video, I'm going to go over exactly why it works, the history of how it was made, and its many adaptations, and where everything is at today to explore whatever happened to a series of unfortunate events. Hi everyone, my name is Otto, and welcome to Exits Examines. We'll be exploring series, franchises, and more after their prime time has seemingly come to an end. If that sounds good to you, there's a like and subscribe button below. Okay, so imagine your typical children's book with an exciting adventure filled with fun characters and a happy ending. Now, throw literally all of that on its head and twist it into this cruel and absurd inversion, and you have a series of unfortunate events. This series by Lemony Snicket follows the plight of Violet, Klaus, and Sonny Baudelaire. Orphaned by a fire that suspiciously claimed their parents' lives, the siblings are relentlessly pursued by a murderous relative, Count Olaf, who wants nothing more than to steal their immense fortune through any means necessary. The world itself is absurd and morose. Secret societies lurk in the shadows, and adults around the children are too incompetent or cowardly to help them. It's this mix of child abuse, gruesome deaths, violence, arson, and a healthy dose of existential dread. Sounds delightful, right? But there's this strange gothic charm here that just transcends time. The story unfolds in this world that seems timeless, with many elements from the 19th century like Morse code, but then sometimes there'll be advanced computers or fiber optic cables, and it kind of throws everything you knew out the window. Adding to this confusion, there's also elements from different cultures, and apparently Snicket named the Baudelaires as he did, Klaus, Violet, and Sonny, because apparently they were all names from different countries for exactly this reason. Now, despite this surreal, almost comically grim backdrop, the characters are undeniably endearing. Violet possesses a remarkable talent for invention, Klaus devours books with insatiable curiosity, and Sonny, well, she has a talent for biting that eventually evolves into a surprising culinary skill. While they are smart, it's not like they're flawless superheroes. They make mistakes, they're dealing with grief, and they do have vulnerabilities. But what really brings this series together, even on repeat reads, is Count Olaf. He is the absolute epitome of villainy. Well, at first glance anyway. Everything about him is just so over the top, from his disguises to his insisting that he is an incredible actor to his ridiculous henchmen. And it's all just so comically villain. But then you're jolted out of your sense of security when you realize that this guy is actually a psychopath. He murders multiple people, threatens to cut off Sonny's toes, and tries to get the children burned at the stake. But one of the most beautiful things about this series is that there is a layer of nuance here. And as the series progresses, we, as well as the Baudelaires, start to see everything in less black and white terms, even with someone as seemingly evil as Count Olaf. Now, this unconventional approach is precisely what makes a series of unfortunate events so incredible. Unlike most children's fiction, it embraces dark themes with unflinching honesty. Murders, arson, greed, grief, the banality of evil, and loneliness are explored with a surprising blend of simplicity and humanity, in direct and very confrontational contrast to the cheerful optimism often found in children's literature. And it's so fascinating because actually, at the end of the day, like other YA books, it's a coming-of-age story. When we first meet the Baudelaires, they're wealthy and innocent. Then they're forced into a dreadful world rife with corruption and cruelty, and must learn to cope with loss as well as their own sense of unsettling morality. personality, but at the end of the story, they're all the stronger for it. And this is all held together and elevated by some wonderfully concise and ironic writing. It's this seemingly insane blend of absurdist humor and sarcastic storytelling with a huge heap of literary allusions dumped in for good measure. There are literally countless in here, but to name a few, the Baudelaires are named after the famed French poet Charles Baudelaire. Uncle Monty is named after Monty Python, and classic literary settings like desert islands are thrown in. There's this constant motif of Snicket defining words, and although this starts as matter of fact, it becomes more absurd and contextual and strange as the series goes on. There's this dry, droll, and absurd humor that permeates the book, and it all kind of congeals together into this postmodern metafictional mess. But I think at the heart, the messages are ultimately empathetic. These books hold surprising beauty and nuance. I think the genius here lies in its capturing of life's harsh realities, the unfairness, the universal struggles, and transforming them into something strangely comforting. People aren't wicked or noble. They're like chef salads with good things and bad things chopped and mixed together in a vinaigrette of confusion and conflict. And then beyond that, there's this whole fixation and fascination with secrets in the books, which even extends to the narrator. The secretive and furtive Lemony Snicket. Hints of a lost love named Beatrice are scattered throughout the books, with Snicket's mournful dedications to her at the beginning of each novel, and it really adds this air of tragedy and mystery. In this vein, each book features a letter to the editor that often drops subtle hints about the upcoming events. Ripped edges hint at danger, fancy stationery whispers of settings, and later letters become increasingly cryptic. And this is all the more interesting when you realize that Lemony Snicket is far from a passive observer. He injects his own voice and ideas into the narrative, even becoming entangled in the story itself. For a long time, readers didn't understand the extent of his involvement, and this all led to this really fun feeling like both you as the reader and Snicket were piecing together the fragments of this grand, tragic mystery. And there are just a ton of secrets, which were and still are a huge draw to the series, with many of them still not being explained even to this day. What's in the sugar bowl, the great unknown, who started the Baudelaire fire? These are all questions for the ages. And if there's enough interest, I might even try my hand at an iceberg video explaining them all, because some of them have some pretty unhinged and fun theories. Anyway, going beyond that, just the entire presentation here is nothing short of phenomenal and just reinforces the series' surreal, gothic, and absurdly morose tone. Take the covers. Originally released with these gorgeous Victorian-era designs, the book jackets urged you to put the books down immediately, and this was apparently inspired by warning labels on medicine. And then there were the illustrations, which were just nothing short of perfection, and I'm not sure if there has ever been a better example of visuals matching the vibe of a setting. They're simple, a little surreal, and just perfectly capture the gothic style and originality of the story. Now, sadly, of course, just like Santa Claus, I hate to break it to you, but Lemony Snicket is not real. The real author's identity was a secret for a long time, but the man behind a series of unfortunate events is Daniel Handler, and as you might imagine for someone who wrote such a unique series, he's a bit of a character himself. Now, fascinatingly enough, a series of unfortunate events kind of came to be through happenstance. Basically, when he was trying to find a publisher for his first novel, one of them, HarperCollins, passed on it, but they did suggest for him to write a story for children. Handler thought it was a terrible idea at first, and quote, "I told her I had an idea for a gothic novel, which had been falling apart as I was writing it. But I thought instead it could be the story of children growing through all these terrible things. I expected she would hate the idea, and instead she said she liked it. And all I could picture was that the next morning she was going to call me and say, 'I've sobered up and you're right, it's a terrible idea.' But instead she called and said, 'I'm not drinking anything and I still like the idea.' I kept being amazed that people weren't horrified by it. I kept waiting for someone to say, 'What is anyone thinking? We're not going to publish this.' But they didn't, and then the books were published. Now, honestly, I'm just as shocked that the series was made, and it's something of a miracle. I think that the conditions and people lined up in just the perfect way to make this happen, and like I said before, I just can't imagine this being made today. Apparently, Handler was inspired by being sick of the sugary sweet and unrealistic optimism in most children's books. He saw children's literature as overly optimistic, often dumbing down complex issues with forced happy endings, which he thought was stupid because he thought kids were already aware of the world's darkness and shielding them from it was a disservice. And well, apparently kids felt the same way, because to say it was a phenomenon would be an understatement. It sold more than 60 million copies and was thought to be a huge competitor with other popular YA series of the time. And I think it really speaks to how Handler was so right about real issues and themes resonating with children. There was nothing else like it before or since, and it really goes to show that there is a place for tragedy in the world of young adult literature, especially when it's handled with so much care and beauty like it is here. Now, that's not to say that it was entirely without criticism. A handful of schools even banned the book due to its themes of incest and the bad beginning when Olaf tries to marry Violet, and there were other criticisms of repetitive format, particularly in the first half of the series. But mostly people were just upset because even at the end of the series, there were still so many secrets. Now, I'm not going to spoil anything, but to say that the series ended on a cliffhanger would also be an understatement. And aside from the obvious one, there were a ton of secrets that were never explained. Fortunately, the series didn't end at, well, the end. There were a number of companion books, including Lemony Snicket, the unauthorized autobiography in 2002, between the releases of The Hostile Hospital and The Carnivorous Carnival. It contains extra information on VFD and many other characters. It also contains pretty crucial information on earlier books, but my favorite part about this is that it's actually 2 books. Well, kind of. On the hardback version is a reversible book jacket to disguise it as a cheerful story called The Pony Party, which is book number 1 of the fictional series of The Luckiest Kids in the World. And the author's name is even an anagram of Lemony Snicket, and it's hilarious, and I just love that this is a thing. Additionally, before the release of The End, there was also 13 Shocking Secrets You'll Wish You Never Knew About Lemony Snicket, which was an in-universe promotional pamphlet containing 13 secrets about Lemony Snicket, with a final secret being found by decoding a puzzle. Then, in 2006, the Beatrice letters came out, and it was a short book consisting of 13 letters to and from Lemony Snicket. Now, I literally cannot go into any detail about this at all to avoid spoilers, but I do love how all these companion books seemingly exist in the universe itself, and as such, they're all real pieces of writing, letters, autobiographies, and it's all just tied together really nicely. Now, there were also some other cute little tie-ins as well, including The Blank Book, which is a blank book, released in 2004, and it's intended to be kind of a commonplace book, which are featured extensively in the series. It could be used as a diary, and it includes quotes and illustrations. Now, this was a point of some confusion for me because, confusingly, there's also Notorious Notations released in 2006, and I cannot tell if this is the same thing as The Blank Book, because functionally they're the same thing, and it also includes quotes and illustrations. So I'm not sure if it's something like a British version of The Blank Book, so if anyone has both of these, I would love to know. Now, around this time in 2007, the illustrator for the main series, Brett Helquist, released special paperbacks designed to mimic Penny Dreadfuls, which perfectly complements the aesthetic of the series. The first 3 were released in 2007 and had some unique illustrations to go along with it. But things seem to sizzle out about halfway through the series and it remains unfinished. But I really hope these see the light of day because the style is just so good. There was also other short stories penned by Lemony Snicket, but not really relating to the events of the main series, and these include Poison for Breakfast and Horseradish, Bitter Truths You Can't Avoid. But the big one, of course, is an entire other series called All the Wrong Questions in 2012, which is a 4-part prequel series, with even its own companion books, the hero of the story and the file under. While the signature dark humor remains, it's a bit of a different vibe, with it being first-person narration from a young Snicket, and instead of the constant relocation of the orphans, it unfolds entirely in the decaying seaside town of Staying by the Sea. It's kind of a homage to the noir genre, with Snicket trying to uncover a conspiracy. Now, it doesn't have too much to do with a series of unfortunate events in terms of plots or most of the characters, but there is a monster which some people theorize could be the Great Unknown, which is another major secret from the mainline series, which is a whole other rabbit hole. But staying on track, another fascinating component of this series are the adaptations. Now, a series like this with such a unique tone and voice is hard to nail down, but luckily the attempts that were made were, for the most part, pretty faithful. The first attempt came in 2004, which condensed the first 3 books into a single film. While commercially successful and generally well received, it did take a lot of liberties. For example, some dark elements were kind of softened, and some events were reshuffled for a more dramatic climax. Most notably, Count Olaf's attempted marriage to Violet, originally placed near the end of A Bad Beginning, became the film's finale. Now, apparently this was done to create a stronger ending, but resulted in kind of awkward pacing. Now, this all makes more sense when you realize that the development was a bit chaotic. Handler reportedly had significant creative differences with the production and ultimately left the project feeling, quote, somewhere between fired and quitting. Well, for a while, it seemed like it was going to be the most exciting motion picture ever made, and there was this huge changing of the guard in which I was more or less fired as a screenwriter. And the producer quit, and the director was either fired or quit depending on whom you ask. If you ask him, he says he was fired. So then for a while, it looked like it was going to be the worst movie ever made, hopelessly embarrassing, and by the time it was finishing up, I was so grateful that it wasn't the worst movie ever made that I overlooked many things that might have otherwise upset me. This makes more sense when you realize that this was a huge undertaking. The budget was enormous at $100 million, so a lot was at stake. But the budget definitely didn't go to waste, with sets being actually built so the actors could really feel like they were part of the world. Even smaller details like Violet's black Victorian dress complemented the film's overall aesthetic, a blend of steampunk and Tim Burton-esque gothic influences. There were also these hilarious marketing tie-ins, including the pessimistic posters, the ponderous postcards, and amazingly enough, even one with Lunchables, which, are those still a thing? Anyway, it was called The Dismal Dinner by Lemony Snicket himself, which described a scene at the fourth-to-last dinner party which the Baudelaire parents held in their mansion before it burned down, and it had its own set of secret messages to uncode. Now, there were plans for a sequel, but it never panned out. But even better than a sequel, there is this commentary of the film by the hopelessly apologetic director and handler as Snicket, who just rips into the movie. I don't think I've ever seen something as filled with irony and passive aggressiveness, and I highly suggest you watch it as it's on YouTube, and honestly, I could not stop laughing. Now, I think a major issue with the movie was the format itself. The series of unfortunate events, as a series, doesn't lend itself to a movie format. Fortunately, Netflix picked this up in 2017, and this was back when Netflix still had a chip on its shoulder and had something to prove. And to make a long story short, I do not think we could have asked for a better adaptation. It masterfully balances the source material with thoughtful additions that enrich the world, and it's a rare case where the additions made don't detract from the world but rather add to it. Each book is given time to shine and split into 2-hour-long episodes, except for the final book, and it perfectly captures the dark humor and aesthetic with this crazy blend of Wes Anderson and the Addams Family. The casting choices were phenomenal too, with Neil Patrick Harris delivering a captivating performance as Count Olaf, and Patrick Warburton perfectly embodying the deadpan narration of Lemony Snicket. I will say though that Harris sometimes leans too into the comicalness of Count Olaf. Like in the books he is comical but also terrifying, and I personally think that was missing here and in the 2004 movie. Some people were also disappointed in other certain changes and revelations, such as the infamous Sugar Bowl, but at the end of the day, it really is a shining example of an adaptation done right, which after covering series after series for this channel, I hate to say is a sadly rare thing indeed. Now, of course, on the not so good side of the coin here, there's also the video game. This was released in 2004 alongside the movie, and yeah, I think some concepts just don't really work in a game format. Basically, we follow the plot of the movie, but with some bizarre first-person shooter segments and platforming. I don't think the game is terrible by any means, and the inventing in particular, although a bit wonky, is kind of cool, but I do think there is a lot of missed potential. I think a game in this setting could be cool, but maybe in kind of an abstract puzzle game, something like Return of the Obra Dinn, which would really lean into the surreal aspect of the world. Now, we did kind of get this in another game in 2005, also titled A Series of Unfortunate Events, but it's kind of more like a board game than anything else. Basically, you navigate a board featuring locations and characters from the series. Using clues and deductive skills, you have to solve mysteries by determining what object or character was present in each room during a specific unfortunate event. Speaking of games, there were a couple non-video game versions, including one in 2002 called the Perilous Parlor Game, then the Catastrophic Card Game, and then Puzzling Puzzles, which is more of a puzzle book with some trick questions, and even Unsolvable Puzzles, which is another in-universe piece of media, which is supposed to be a training book for VFD. And also, because I'm not sure where else to put this, there was also an interactive web series called You Choose the Mystery, which asks viewers to select their own path through a film noir story, which is narrated by Lemony Snicket. And this can all be seen on YouTube and is hilarious. And again, I'm just so happy that this exists. Now, in recent years, although there haven't been any more stories in the series of unfortunate events, Daniel Handler has has released a steady stream of books under the Snicket name. These include The Bad Mood and the Stick, which is a picture book of all things, and Poison for Breakfast in 2021. Now, it is worth mentioning that Handler himself has come under criticism in recent years for a controversial joke about race, and then in 2018, allegations of inappropriate sexual comments arose during the wider Me Too movement, culminating in Wesleyan University students protesting a planned speech by Handler. Now, Handler himself has been outspoken about being a victim of sexual assault himself, and he did issue apologies and also donations after these incidents. It seems like a lot of this left a bad taste in his mouth, with him later releasing the book And Then What Else in 2024, which is about a range of topics, but does involve a lot of the controversies as well as the back and forth with the 2004 movie. Now, this is very much Daniel Handler as an author and not Lemony Snicket, and it kind of reads like his raw, unadulterated thoughts, and it's kind of part memoir and part critique, and reveals many of his influences. So for people who enjoy his writing style, I definitely recommend it because it is really interesting. Okay, so where does that leave us now? Well, it seems like Handler has, for all intents and purposes, moved on from the series of unfortunate events, but there's nothing stopping another side story or companion book being written, or at the very least, another book by Lemony Snicket. But as of now, there have been no rumors about a new series or prequel, and it's unlikely there'll be another TV adaptation in the near future since the Netflix one wrapped up so recently. And this all got me wondering, with a series this unique and out of left field, was its success a fluke? And why has it inspired such a cult following? And I think the answer is pretty simple. There is just nothing else quite like a series of unfortunate events, from the tone to the aesthetic to the themes. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, I don't think anything like this will be made again, at least not in the near future. And in fact, it was probably a small miracle that this was made at all. I'm shocked that a publisher didn't throw this out as soon as it came through the door, and not to wax poetic, but maybe it does reflect a societal tendency to shield children and even adults from harsh realities, which is a shame because they're undeniably part of the human experience, and I think this unflinching portrayal is a huge reason why the series resonated with so many readers. The series itself is as complete as we could possibly hope for. The book series was concise and stopped when it should have, and the adaptations were way better than anyone could have ever expected them to be, and there's just enough mystery left in the world to make it exciting. Now, I have to say, on this channel, I go back and delve into a number of books I read as a kid, and sometimes it's sad to say that they don't really hold up. This is absolutely not the case with a series of unfortunate events. It's tragic, it's absurd, it's timeless in more ways than one, it's incredibly well written, with its own cohesive voice and identity, and it's no surprise at all that this series captivated a generation of readers and hopefully will continue to, because, well, sometimes tragedy and misery deserve the spotlight too. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate all the help as I'm trying to get this channel off the ground. If there is interest in a iceberg style video exploring the secrets of this universe, please let me know because I'm kind of interested in that idea. Next week is either going to be redoing my Aragon video or that, so just let me know what you guys prefer. As always, a huge shout out to my patrons who keep this channel alive, and if you want to become one, please check out the link in my description below. And as always, if you have any suggestions about what you want me to cover next, just drop a comment. It's always really cool to hear what you guys have to say. Thanks again. I'll see you next time. Bye.